Hello, my name is Emily Carter. Today, I am going to share with you something that will challenge everything you thought you knew about life, death, and the hidden truths of history. This is not just a story, it is a revelation. October 5th, 2023, started like any other day. I was just a nurse working the night shift, tending to patients, watching the clock, counting down the hours until I could go home and rest. But fate had a different plan for me. In a single moment, one that I will never forget, everything changed. I remember the cold air of the early morning, the hum of my car engine, and the dim glow of the streetlights as I drove home, exhausted but relieved that my shift was over. And then, in the blink of an eye, my world turned to chaos. Headlights. A deafening crash. The unbearable force of metal crushing against metal. And then, silence. I was pronounced clinically dead for 6 minutes and 42 seconds. That was all it took. 6 minutes and 42 seconds to step beyond the veil of this world and into a realm far beyond human comprehension. What I saw during those moments defies logic, shatters history, and reveals a truth that has been buried for centuries. I saw Jesus. Not in a way that I had ever imagined. Not in the way countless paintings and sculptures have depicted him. No, he was different. More powerful, more radiant, more real than anything I had ever known. And he spoke to me. In that divine encounter, he unveiled a truth the world has fought to keep hidden. A truth about black people and their divine purpose, a purpose that has been erased, distorted, and buried under centuries of lies. I came back from the dead, not just to tell a story, but to reveal a message that must be heard. A message that will shake the foundations of what we have been taught. A message that will open eyes and free minds. This is my journey beyond life. And if you are willing to listen, I promise you, your life will never be the same again. That night, the rain had just begun to fall as I made my way home. The distant rumble of thunder echoed through the sky, and each raindrop that hit my windshield blurred my vision even more. I was exhausted. The long night shift had drained every ounce of energy from my body, and all I wanted was the comfort of my bed. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I navigated the winding roads, trying to ignore the heavy feeling in my eyelids. The hum of the engine was almost hypnotic, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that in just 5 more minutes, I would be home. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A pair of blinding headlights came out of nowhere, piercing through the rain like twin daggers. The vehicle was swerving wildly, spinning out of control. My heart pounded. Time slowed. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The impact was like an explosion. Metal twisted and crunched as my car was thrown into the air. Glass shattered, sending razor-sharp shards flying around me. The seatbelt yanked my body back violently. Pain shot through my chest, my head snapped forward, and then... nothing. No sound. No feeling. Just darkness. I expected pain. I expected fear. But instead, I felt an overwhelming peace. It was unlike anything I had ever known, calm, weightless, free. Then I saw myself. My broken body lay lifeless in the wreckage, twisted amidst the debris. Blood trickled down my forehead, mixing with the rain. My chest barely moved, struggling to hold on to the last remnants of life. The flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance painted the wet pavement in eerie streaks of color. I could hear the frantic voices of the paramedics, their desperate attempts to revive me. But I wasn't there anymore. I was somewhere else. A presence surrounded me, warm and all-encompassing. I felt myself being lifted, higher and higher, until the shattered remains of the accident scene faded into the distance. A soft glow appeared ahead of me, growing brighter, almost pulling me in. It wasn't harsh like the headlights that had ended my life just moments ago. No, this was different. This light was alive. It pulsed with an energy so pure, so divine, that I instinctively knew, I was no longer in the world of the living. I should have been afraid. But instead, I felt home. Then, as I drifted closer to the light, a voice called my name. It wasn't spoken out loud, but I felt it reverberate through my entire being. It was powerful yet gentle, commanding yet filled with love. Emily. The moment I heard it, I knew exactly who it was. Jesus. And what he was about to show me would change everything. I was pulled upward, beyond the constraints of time and space, into a realm that words could never fully capture. It wasn't just light, it was a presence, a reality more real than anything I had ever known. The very air was alive, humming with an energy that resonated through my being. Love wasn't just something felt here, it was tangible, woven into the very fabric of existence. Then, I heard it again. A voice, not just any voice, but the voice. It wasn't spoken in sound but in spirit, a voice that filled me from the inside out, reverberating through every part of my existence. It was strong yet gentle, commanding yet filled with compassion. Emily. I turned, and there he was. Jesus. But he wasn't like the paintings, the stained glass depictions, or the sculptures I had seen in churches. No, he was something far greater, more radiant, more powerful. His presence alone made my soul tremble with awe. His eyes were unlike anything I had ever seen, deep, full of fire and understanding, holding eternity within them. His skin was rich, glowing like burnished bronze, and his robes shimmered with a light that was not of this world. I couldn't stand. The sheer weight of his glory overwhelmed me, and I fell to my knees. Every burden I had ever carried, every worry, every doubt, they all dissolved in his presence. Tears streamed down my face, but not out of sadness, out of a love so deep that I could not contain it. Then, he reached out. His touch wasn't like human touch. It was power itself, warm, surging with life, filling every empty space within me. Strength flooded my body, and he lifted me up effortlessly. I could feel the very essence of who he was flowing into me, and for the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be whole. I have something to show you, he said, his voice carrying both gentleness and absolute authority. And in an instant, my vision expanded. I was no longer in one place, I was everywhere, seeing beyond the limits of time. The past, the present, and the future unfolded before me, layered like pages in a book that only he could read. I saw history not as it had been told, but as it truly was. And what I saw changed everything. The world had been deceived. A truth, buried and hidden for centuries, was now laid bare before me. I saw the faces of those who had been erased from history, their stories rewritten, their identities stolen. I saw the truth about black people, their divine purpose, their place in God's grand design. They were always mine, Jesus said, his voice carrying sorrow and love in equal measure. They were chosen, set apart, yet the world has sought to erase them from my story. I watched as empires rose and fell, as kings rewrote history to suit their own purposes, as the image of Christ himself was reshaped to fit a false narrative. I saw how entire nations had been built on deception, their foundations resting on stolen identities. And then, I saw something even more terrifying, something yet to come. The future was being shaped by this lie. The world was teetering on the edge of a great awakening, but also a great reckoning. The truth could no longer be hidden, but those who had built their power on deception would not let it go without a fight. Jesus turned to me, his gaze piercing through my very soul. You must tell them, he said. The world must know the truth. A weight settled upon me, a responsibility beyond anything I had ever imagined. But in that moment, I understood. I had been brought back for a reason. And when I awoke, gasping for air, back in the broken shell of my body, I knew my life would never be the same. I saw civilizations rise and fall, their greatness shining like the stars before being swallowed by the darkness of time. I saw men and women of wisdom, leaders who ruled with justice and knowledge that surpassed anything I had ever learned. They were not just names lost to history, they were giants, architects of empires, keepers of ancient truths. These were black men and women, kings and queens who had built wonders long before the world knew the names of Rome or Greece. They were warriors who fought with divine strength, scholars who unlocked the mysteries of the universe, healers who understood the body and the soul in ways modern medicine could never comprehend. They had charted the stars, harnessed the power of the earth, and lived in harmony with the Creator's design. Yet, the world had erased them. I saw the lies take shape, spreading like shadows over history. The truth was rewritten, twisted, buried under centuries of deception. These people, God's chosen, had been stripped of their identity, reduced to mere footnotes in the annals of time. They were no longer kings and visionaries, they were rewritten as slaves, victims, the oppressed. Their knowledge was stolen, their inventions claimed by others, their lineage denied. Tears blurred my vision as I turned to Jesus. His face held both sorrow and unshakable resolve. "They were my chosen ones," he said, his voice steady yet filled with grief. "But the enemy feared them. So he rewrote their history, stole their identity, and buried the truth beneath generations of lies." I felt my heart shatter. The weight of centuries of deception pressed against my chest. Why had I never been taught this? Why had the truth been hidden? I saw ships crossing the ocean, their hulls packed with human lives, men and women, torn from their lands, from their families, from their divine calling. I saw their suffering, the chains that bound their bodies but could never break their spirits. They carried the blood of royalty, yet they were treated as less than human. I saw great kingdoms fade into obscurity, their legacies rewritten by those who sought to erase them. I saw the names of inventors, builders, and philosophers replaced with others who took credit for what was never theirs. I saw languages lost, spiritual traditions destroyed, and a people scattered across the world, forgotten even by themselves. I turned to Jesus, desperate for answers. Why? My voice cracked under the weight of the revelation. He looked at me with infinite patience. Because knowledge is power. And if they knew who they truly were, the world would never be able to contain them. I saw it then, how the lie had been used to control, to manipulate, to keep an entire people from rising to their true destiny. The enemy knew that if they ever awakened to their identity, if they remembered who they were, nothing could stop them. But something was changing. A shift was coming. The chains of deception were beginning to crack. I saw people searching, questioning, uncovering fragments of the truth. The voices of the forgotten were beginning to rise again. "It is time," Jesus said, his eyes burning with purpose. "The truth must be restored." I felt a fire ignite within me, a calling, a mission greater than myself. This wasn't just about history, it was about identity, about destiny, about breaking free from the lie that had enslaved minds for too long. I had been sent back for a reason. The world needed to know. The truth could no longer be erased. The vision shifted. The chains of oppression tightened, their weight pressing down on generations of people. But this was no ordinary war. This was a battle that stretched beyond the physical realm, beyond whips, beyond slavery, beyond segregation. This was spiritual warfare. I saw how the enemy worked, not just through brute force, but through deception, through carefully crafted lies, whispered so subtly that they became accepted as truth. The war was never just about the body, it was about the mind, the soul, the identity. The enemy didn't just use chains, he used ideas. He used media to spread fear, to paint black men as threats, criminals, and dangers to society. He twisted every narrative, making the world believe they were violent, unworthy, broken. He used entertainment to distort the image of black women, turning them into objects of lust or symbols of anger, stripping them of their divine grace, wisdom, and strength. He used education to erase their history, to teach them that their ancestors had contributed nothing, that their worth began and ended with suffering. He rewrote the textbooks, omitted their heroes, and glorified those who had oppressed them. He used the church, the very institution meant to bring freedom, to silence their voices. He twisted scripture, used religion to justify slavery, and told them that obedience to their oppressors was godly. He reshaped Christ's image, making him into something he was not, so that those who looked like him would never recognize themselves in him. Every system was designed to make them forget who they truly were. But then, I saw something else. A crack in the foundation of deception. It was small at first, almost unnoticeable. But then it grew. I saw people awakening, questioning, searching for the truth. I saw them looking beyond what they had been taught, digging deeper, reclaiming their lost identity. I saw young men and women rejecting the labels the world had placed on them, standing taller, walking with the authority they had unknowingly carried all along. I saw scholars uncovering ancient texts, historians piecing together the stories that had been hidden, pastors rediscovering scriptures that had long been misinterpreted. I saw a fire beginning to spread, not a fire of destruction, but a fire of awakening. Then, Jesus turned to me, his expression both solemn and determined. "The war is not over," he said. "But the tide is turning. The truth is rising. And you must be a voice in this battle." I felt the weight of his words settle into my spirit. This was more than just a revelation, it was a call to action. I had been shown the truth, and now I could no longer remain silent. The war was still raging. But for the first time in centuries, the captives were remembering who they were. And nothing, not the media, not history books, not even the gates of hell, could stop what was coming. I saw a movement, a stirring in the spirit realm unlike anything before. Black men and women were rising, not in rebellion, not in vengeance, but in divine authority. Their eyes were opening. The veil that had blinded them for centuries was being lifted, and they were stepping into the truth of who they were. I saw them reclaiming their history, not the one written by their oppressors, but the one ordained by God. They were warriors of the Most High, children of kings and prophets, bearers of a spiritual strength that could not be broken. The chains that had once held them, chains of self-doubt, inferiority, and forgotten identity, began to shatter. Their voices, once silenced, were now echoing across the world. I saw them preaching the true gospel, uncovering hidden knowledge, rejecting the false narratives that had kept them bound. Then, Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with both fire and sorrow. "The enemy isn't afraid of their pain," he said. "He's afraid of their power. He's afraid of the day they wake up and remember who they are." And that day had come. I saw churches no longer preaching a gospel of oppression, but one of liberation. I saw young men and women standing in the streets, speaking truth with a boldness that could not be silenced. I saw mothers and fathers teaching their children who they truly were, breaking the cycle of lies that had been passed down for generations. The enemy was panicking. I saw him scrambling, desperate to contain what was happening. He had spent centuries crafting a deception so deep, so intricate, that he never expected it to unravel. But now, as the truth spread like wildfire, he knew he was running out of time. So he launched one final deception. I saw it forming, a new strategy, more cunning than before. It was no longer about physical chains or forced oppression. It was about distraction. It was about division. I saw the enemy poisoning the movement from within, turning brother against brother, replacing divine purpose with pride, twisting the awakening into something self-serving rather than God-serving. He introduced false doctrines, mixing truth with just enough lies to lead people astray. He used social media, not to spread truth, but to flood minds with confusion. He used entertainment, not to uplift, but to subtly reinforce old stereotypes under the guise of progress. I saw a counterfeit awakening rising alongside the true one. It looked real. It sounded real. But it was a trap. The enemy knew he couldn't stop the awakening, so he tried to corrupt it, to make people believe they were free while still keeping them bound. He made them focus on earthly identity over spiritual identity, on worldly power instead of divine purpose, on self-glorification instead of God's plan. Jesus watched, his face full of grief but also unshakable certainty. "Many will fall into deception," he said. "But those who seek me, those who listen to my voice, will not be led astray." I looked back at the movement, at the people standing on the edge of revelation. They were at a crossroads. Some would choose truth. Some would be lured into the enemy's trap. The awakening had begun. But the battle was far from over. And then, Jesus looked at me once more. His gaze was piercing, filled with both urgency and love. "Go back," he said. "Tell them. Warn them. The time is short." In that moment, I felt a force pulling me downward, back toward the world I had left behind. The vision began to fade, but the message burned in my soul. I had seen the truth. I had seen the deception. And now, I had a mission. The world was shifting, but not toward freedom, it was being reshaped by forces that worked in secret. I saw how the deception deepened, weaving its way through governments, media, and even the church. The enemy was no longer using force to suppress the truth, he was using comfort, distraction, and illusion. People were being told they didn't need God. That faith was outdated, that history was irrelevant, that morality was subjective. The enemy had learned from past mistakes, chains and oppression only strengthened the resolve of the oppressed. So now, he came with flattery instead of fear, seduction instead of slavery. I saw churches embracing false doctrines, twisting scripture to fit the desires of the world. They no longer preached about righteousness, repentance, or holiness. Instead, they taught that sin no longer existed, that people were free to do as they pleased, that all paths led to God, that there was no absolute truth. I saw social movements rising, claiming to fight for justice but secretly being controlled by forces that had no interest in truth. They used the struggles of black men and women to push hidden agendas, feeding people half-truths while keeping them blind to their divine purpose. They stirred up anger but never offered healing, they demanded power but rejected responsibility. I saw schools rewriting history, not to correct past lies, but to introduce new ones. Young black children were being taught that their ancestors were only victims, that they had no role in shaping civilization, that their faith was a tool of oppression rather than a weapon of liberation. Instead of awakening them, they were being numbed, kept docile, taught to find their identity in culture, in movements, in the world, rather than in God. And the most heartbreaking vision of all, I saw spiritual leaders bowing to deception. Men and women who had once been warriors of faith, who had preached boldly, who had stood against injustice, were now compromising in the name of unity, progress, and acceptance. They told their congregations what they wanted to hear, not what they needed to hear. They spoke of prosperity but not sacrifice, of self-love but not self-denial, of blessings but not obedience. And because of this, the people fell deeper into deception, believing that if they had success in the world, they must be in alignment with God. Then, Jesus' voice thundered, shaking everything around me. "Tell them not to fall for it. The enemy will come with comfort, not chains. He will distract them, numb them, offer them success in exchange for silence. But those who remain in truth will be protected." I saw it then. The real battle was not for land, not for money, not even for justice. It was for the soul. I saw people being lulled into spiritual sleep, trading their divine inheritance for temporary pleasure. They didn't see the chains forming around them because this time, they were invisible. The enemy was making them comfortable in captivity, so they wouldn't even try to escape. But I also saw the remnant. A group of people who refused to bow. They were awake, standing firm in truth, unmoved by deception. They didn't seek the approval of the world, they sought the voice of God. They weren't distracted by empty promises, they were focused on their mission. I saw them breaking the chains, reclaiming their history, restoring their families, teaching the next generation the truth. The battle was intensifying. The deception was stronger than ever. But those who stood in truth were shining like lights in the darkness. And then Jesus looked at me, his expression fierce yet full of love. Tell them to choose. The time is short. And just like that, I was falling, plunging back toward the world I had left behind. I gasped for air, my body jolting awake. I was back. But I knew I couldn't stay silent. I had seen the truth. And now, I had to share it. I saw the future unfold before me, two paths stretching in opposite directions. On one path, those who chose comfort over truth drifted further into deception. Their hearts grew numb, their spirits dull. They accepted the world's version of reality without question. They followed leaders who tickled their ears with pleasing words but led them away from God. They embraced convenience over conviction, unity over righteousness, success over surrender. And in the end, they were swallowed by the very system they trusted. But on the other path, I saw the remnant, those who refused to bow to deception. They were not many, but they were strong. They stood firm, unshaken by the shifting tides of the world. They sought God above all else, not in rituals, not in empty traditions, but in spirit and truth. They walked in boldness, authority, and divine wisdom. I saw families being restored, fathers returning to their homes, mothers teaching their children the truth before the world could fill their minds with lies. I saw businesses thriving, led by men and women who refused to compromise their faith for profit, who built wealth not for selfish gain but to uplift their communities. I saw faith growing stronger than ever, believers gathering, not just in church buildings, but in homes, in workplaces, in the streets, declaring the truth of God without fear. My heart pounded as I turned to Jesus. What should they do? I asked, desperate for guidance. His gaze met mine, steady and filled with fire. Tell them to seek me, he said. Not just in church, not just in tradition, but in truth. Tell them to read the word for themselves, to question everything the world tells them. To test every spirit, to discern every teaching. To rely on my voice above all others. Teach their children before the world does, he continued. Do not wait for schools, for governments, for media to tell them who they are. Raise them in truth so they will not be deceived. Unite with those who stand for truth, he commanded. Do not let petty divisions separate you. Do not let the enemy divide you by race, by politics, by personal opinions. My people must be one in spirit, standing together against the deception of the age. His voice thundered, shaking my very soul. The time is short. The battle is intensifying. But victory has already been written. I saw it then, the final days of this war. The darkness was rising, but the light was rising higher. The enemy was unleashing his last, desperate assault, but the remnant was unstoppable. They were walking in truth, moving in power, armed with the word, filled with the Spirit, covered by divine protection. I knew, beyond all doubt, that this was the final call. The time to choose was now. No more neutrality. No more waiting. No more silence. I had been given a message, and now, I had to deliver it. I opened my eyes, gasping for air, back in my body. But my spirit was forever changed. The vision was clear. The mission was urgent. And I could not, would not, stay silent. I felt myself being pulled back, away from the divine realm, away from the presence of Jesus, away from the revelation that had transformed everything I thought I knew. Wait, Lord. I cried, reaching out, desperate to hold on to this moment a little longer. There's still so much I need to ask. Jesus smiled, a smile filled with both love and purpose. There was peace in his expression, yet I could feel the weight of urgency in his words. You have seen enough, he said. Now go. Speak boldly. Do not be afraid. I am with you. And then, the light began to fade. The warmth, the weightlessness, the overwhelming presence of love, it all started slipping away. I tried to hold on to it, but I could feel myself falling. The sensation was not one of fear but of transition, as if I was being placed back into the confines of my earthly body. Then, with a gasp, I jolted awake. Pain shot through my chest as my lungs fought to pull in air. My body ached, my skin was cold and damp, and the beeping of medical machines filled my ears. Bright hospital lights burned my eyes as I struggled to make sense of my surroundings. I was back. Voices echoed around me, urgent, panicked, disbelieving. "She's back," one doctor exclaimed. I can't believe it, her heart had stopped for over 6 minutes. A nurse gripped my wrist, checking for my pulse. Another was adjusting the 4 in my arm. The room buzzed with stunned energy, as if the impossible had just unfolded before their eyes. But I knew why I had returned. I had not come back by accident. I had been sent. The memories of what I had seen were still fresh, burned into my soul like fire. The words of Jesus echoed in my mind. "Speak boldly. Do not be afraid. I am with you." I looked at the doctors, at the nurses, at the people surrounding my bed, and I realized something: they had no idea what had just happened to me. They had no idea that while my heart had stopped, my spirit had traveled to a place beyond time. They had no idea that I had stood before the King of Kings, that I had seen history unfold, that I had been given a message meant to shake the foundations of this world. I tried to speak, but my voice was weak. The nurse placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Don't try to talk yet," she said softly. "You've been through a lot." If only she knew. I closed my eyes, gathering my strength. There was no time to waste. I had to find a way to share what I had seen, to tell the world what was coming, to warn those who were still asleep. Because now, I understood. The war was real. The deception was stronger than ever. And the only thing that could break it was the truth. I wasn't the same woman who had driven home that night, exhausted from a long shift. I wasn't just Emily Carter, an ordinary nurse with an ordinary life. I was a messenger. I had been given a second chance, not for my sake, but for the sake of those who still walked in darkness. And I would not stay silent. I share this testimony because the time is short. If you are reading this, it is not by accident. The deception is already in motion. It is creeping into minds, into schools, into churches, into homes. It is disguised as progress, as enlightenment, as personal freedom, but it is a lie. A lie designed to keep you asleep. The enemy wants you to forget who you are. He wants you to believe that you are powerless, that you are unworthy, that your past defines you, that your future is already written by forces beyond your control. He wants you to chase after worldly success while losing your soul, to trade your faith for comfort, to accept a watered-down gospel that offers blessings without obedience, grace without repentance, and salvation without transformation. But Jesus is calling his people back. He is calling you to wake up, to open your eyes, to see beyond the illusion, to remember the truth that has been hidden for too long. Do not be deceived. Do not let the world tell you that you are less than what God created you to be. Do not let the voices of this world drown out the voice of your Creator. Seek the truth. Do not just accept what you have been told, search, question, test everything. Read the Word for yourself. Do not rely on what the world teaches, but seek wisdom from the one who created you. Hold on to your faith. The world will tell you that faith is foolish, that it is weak, that it is outdated. But faith is your weapon, your armor, your key to overcoming the deception that has ensnared so many. And remember this. When the awakening is complete, nothing will ever be the same again. I saw it. I saw the moment when the veil would be fully lifted, when the lies would crumble, when the truth would shine so brightly that the enemy could no longer hide. I saw the ones who held on, who refused to be deceived, standing in power, walking in divine authority. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. What was taken will be restored. What was hidden will be revealed. The voices that were silenced will rise again, and the world will tremble at the power of those who remember who they are. But the choice is yours. You can stay asleep, wrapped in the illusion, clinging to the comforts of deception. Or you can wake up, rise up, and take your place in what is coming. The time has come. Will you wake up?